Hello, 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 and welcome to Elden Ring Nightreign. Now, this is a sort of post commentary video of my first attempt at playing a round of this game. And I figured that it would probably be best to do it this way around, talking about my experience with the title in the post commentary format rather than live, because it gives me time to process what I have played, along with it means I can talk about how I have gotten on with the title since, whilst you guys get a glimpse at what my first go of this game is like. For those who want to know what my thoughts on Elden Ring were, I have an entire playlist of that on my channel, and I will be frank, I was very disappointed with that title. I've clocked in more hours in Elden Ring than I would like to admit, but at the same time, I feel like that has prepared me for a future video if I were to ever do anything like that on Elden Ring, because I'm quite well versed in that title. So yeah, I love Dark Souls 1. I love a portion of Demon's Souls. Dark Souls 2 is the bane of my existence. Dark Souls 3 is a solid enough title. I'm not a huge fan of the world building. In terms of level design, I'm not a fan of Dark Souls 3 in particular. The interconnectiveness of Dark Souls 1 is sort of lost in that sequel, unfortunately, and it just tried to pick it up in a few areas, but it just does not succeed. And the bosses are fairly hit and miss in DS3 as well, unfortunately. The highs are high, but the lows are unfortunately low. I would say the lowest in the series, though. I don't think any boss in Dark Souls 3 comes quite as low as the bosses in DS2 and Elden Ring, because, yeah, Elden Ring unfortunately ranks that low for me. Subjectively, I quite like Elden Ring, but on an objective level, I think that it's quite bad. It doesn't really achieve the same heights as Dark Souls 1, and the telegraphing in particular when it comes to enemy attacks is quite shoddy, unfortunately. But yeah, feigning attacks as well is also a horrible thing in that title, along with a number of other things. Anyway, let's stop talking about Elden Ring. Just long story short, didn't like it. If you want my full thoughts on the why, check out that series, because I go pretty in depth with my issues. A lot of them are mechanical, a lot of them are just... It shares a lot of DNA with Breath of the Wild, in the sense that there are lots of mechanics just sort of thrown in there without really much rhyme or reason. They exist, but the incentive to use them just doesn't really come through, unfortunately. And the bosses are just horrendous overall. It's not a matter of difficulty, it's a matter of being able to read whatever the hell's going on in front of you, and eventually you do sort of fall into this rhythm where you can sort of ascertain what's happening, but it's a slog at best. The idea that you have to sort of read through fireworks being blasted into your eyes, and I think that Shadow of the Earth Tree is a prime example of that. A lot of the bosses in that, with the exception of Mesmer, it's just bad. It's just a visual and particle effects being thrown at you. The ulcerated tree spirit is probably a prime example of this. A giant fur magnet that's just blasting in your face, and you can't really tell what it's going to do or when it's going to do it. You just have to hope and pray. Anyway, all that out of the way with, what is Nightreign? What is Elden Ring Nightreign? Is it a sequel? Is it a spin-off? It's a spin-off. Elden Ring Nightreign, it's kind of fascinating, this title, because it doesn't really have a place in From Software's library. It's got all the gubbins of From Software's modern combat system, with a bunch of enemies and bosses, primarily bosses, copied and pasted from previous Soulsborne titles, specifically the Soul series. And as a result, we are dealing with what is essentially Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring's combat system with Dark Souls 1 and 2 bosses. And that's fascinating to me because it literally just feels like they've just been put in here at times. Duke's Dear Freya was just hilarious to me when I first saw her because it was like, okay, you've done nothing to improve this fight. The fight was horrible in DS2. It wasn't bad. It takes no time whatsoever to get through. But they did nothing to improve that fight. Absolutely nothing. They just plopped it in this game. And you might think that I'm really angry or annoyed about that. Because it's not great, objectively. But then you have a look at what this game is. And you're going to hear the term Battle Royale being thrown around there, like Fortnite comparisons here and there. Ignore that. Ignore that, because for the most part, this plays less like a Battle Royale Fortnite-style game. If you want the Fortnite comparison to be in there, there's a circle that closes in, and you get loot. That's it. There's no grand winner at the end of this or anything like that. It's a cooperative game. But what you can already see, hopefully, with the character that we're playing as, because, shock horror, we're playing as a character from the get-go that actually has equipment from the get-go and abilities that are unique specifically to the character we're playing as. The whip, for example, that we're using here, the sort of grapple shot. You'll see me use that quite a bit in this video because when we actually go into a proper round, because this is still the tutorial, when we go into a proper round, I will be using that quite a bit in order to try and close the distance with some enemies. Because one of the difficulties with a lot of the large bosses in the likes of Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 is that you're spending, especially in Elden Ring with the field bosses, you're spending a lot of time running after them above anything else, especially when you've got co-op enabled. So to have that ability just to sling over, it was a pretty cool thing. But yeah, because you've got all these unique abilities specific to the character, it was like, holy shit, a moveset to learn. It, like, you know, you can go off and you can pick up other weapons, Elden Ring and Dark Souls weapons throughout the game. You can absolutely do that if you want to. But there was something just fascinating about having a build to jump right into. And to do that, it was like, oh shit, okay, this is kind of cool. And as you just saw, ignore that I died during this fight. Ignore it, it's fine. My brain was like, okay, let's try and see what's happening here. And then I realised that I was playing an Elden Ring boss with an AI companion, which essentially means that the AI is broken. They are, like, really, it's hard to predict what they're doing, which will be a complaint I'll talk about in a little bit anyway. But yeah, we'll move on from that for the time being. As you could see from when we leveled up beforehand, and we're going to die eventually in this, which means when you die you lose level, but the stats of when you level up are predetermined, not just for the character but also for the weapons that you're using. Certain weapons will be leveled up, and that's fucking great. That's great because it incentivizes me to use specific abilities. You know, if I have a character that's like, yeah, this character whenever he levels up, there seems to be like a heavy emphasis on dexterity or a heavy emphasis on intelligence or something along those lines. And my brain's like, cool, I'm going to look out for those weapons. I'm going to look out for equipment that fits under that. It's not a matter of like selecting a build straight from Elden Ring, because essentially when you select a build from any Dark Souls game, it doesn't matter entirely. It doesn't take long to even out your stats to what you want. So if you started with like a magic build in Dark Souls 1, for example, it won't take too long, or even Elden Ring, it won't take too long for you to be able to find a weapon that you can use, and then on top of that, it won't take too long for you to be able to like readjust your build, especially in Elden Ring because of respecking and all that jazz. But yeah, to actually have a character was where it's like, oh, okay, there's a moveset to learn here, there's abilities to learn surrounding this character. It was an improvement. It was a drastic improvement. in terms of like my motivation to play this game, because now it's like, okay, I've got a character to learn, and you might wonder why that's an improvement on Elden Ring. Like, why would it be an improvement that instead of focusing on the specific stats that I want to focus on, I am instead focusing on the stats of the character that I'm choosing? Because it locks you in. It gets your brain racing. You know, limitation is also limitation is also a way to spark creativity, and I sort of love that, because what you eventually start doing is you're using mechanics that you otherwise wouldn't. Right? So if you're locked into an intelligence build, for example, and you've never used an intelligence build before, your brain would automatically be like, okay, let's get the feel of this. Let's sort of work our way around what this build is like. Let's try and see what we can do in order to improve my experience with this. And then you sort of personalize it through that, if that makes sense. So instead of starting from scratch with a blank canvas, you are now focusing on getting comfortable with these builds individually. And because they already have their own weapons and abilities to work with, you've got like a playing field early on. You're not just like, it's not like a sorcerer build in Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 1, where you're just sort of like, okay, I have like the most basic of basic abilities here. What do I do? Like, you sort of have to brute force the learning experience, which isn't bad. That's good in its own right, but when you get to Elden Ring, where there is just loot littered everywhere, all across the map, and it's specific loot as well, so if you wanted to improve, like, if you wanted to improve your build in any way, shape, or form, that would mean going really, really far off into the corner of the map to pick up a specific item that may or may not improve your time. You're not playing the game at that point. What you're doing is shopping. And you do that, and then you beat the game. That's normally how build making works in these titles, for me at the very least. I end up going after a build that I want to, and then the second I've cobbled it together, I just go straight to the end game. It's normally how it works for these titles. So to have a build where it's like, okay, so what happens when the base of the build is already competent? What happens when we've got abilities, when we've got weapons, when we've got like a foundation to work with right from the get-go? And the answer to that is you start working with that foundation. You don't necessarily break away and do your own thing, but you start working with it, and it means that you've got something to learn. You've got something to pay attention to. You're learning how your character moves, how they interact, and being stuck with a weapon in particular, granted, not for very long, until you get a chest or something along those lines where you can pick up a weapon that's similar to it, and you can pick that up and swap it over. But you start to get this like groove going over the course of Nightreign, where you're like, okay, this is how that weapon works. Cool. I now know how that weapon works for that build. You start to get a bit more creative with how you use that individual weapon. That weapon starts to like carry itself almost, instead of it being like this disposable thing, instead of it being something along the lines of like I don't know, like your early starting weapons in Elden Ring, where you just pick them up and it's like, okay, I'm gonna keep you until I get like the Bloodhound Fang, for example, and then you switch over to that, and then at that point you don't learn anything about that weapon. You just keep using the weapon over and over and over again. You start learning about like the attack times for these weapons. You start learning about how long it takes to do heavy attacks. You learn about what heavy attacks do to individual enemies in particular. This was stuff that I didn't pay attention to in Elden Ring. I didn't care to pay attention to this in Elden Ring. I went with the heavy hitters. I went with magic, and when I was playing those builds, it was just a matter of like, okay, what's just going to deplete the health bar fastest, because the entire world is open to me. So I'm just going to go after the biggest, heaviest hitter possible, and then that's that. And with this, that's not the case, because, once again, because you have a weapon that you're going to be using at the start of each match individually, until you swap it out for a better weapon that you might find later on, you start to get used to that starting weapon. You start to get used to how it feels and how you're going to use it. And as I said, you get into that groove. You start identifying, like, okay, cool, this weapon, right? Shit, I can't upgrade this weapon easily like I would be able to in Elden Ring. I can't just go off to a mine because everything's procedurally generated. So then that means you have to start learning the timing of your attacks. You're going to have to start dodging. You have to pay attention to the enemies more. And that's a godsend, because it turns what Elden Ring was, which was essentially hacker-slashifying the Dark Souls series, and was sort of regressing in a good way. But I don't think it was on purpose. I've made a post about this. I think that the idea of turning this into sort of like a... it's not Battle Royale once again, but that idea of that ring closing in on you and everything being procedurally generated. You have to level up. You don't have to, but it's preferable to level up and gain loot as you go, which means to kill as many enemies as you can before that circle closes and you end up fighting the boss of one of 3 nights. And what that essentially means is that you start paying attention to those camps a lot more. If there isn't a night, it's not like in Elden Ring where it's like, I know exactly what items in that camp. I don't have to pay attention to that. All the regular enemies on the road. Or, you know, you just hop on torrent and you run past it. You don't have that in this game, which means that if you come across a camp, because the loot is randomized with sort of scale to where you're at, your brain starts to tick, and then you go, no, actually, I will go after that camp, because I feel like that if I go after that camp, if I take them down and I get the loot there, there's a chance I might get something like a Titanite shard, or, you know, like the equivalent of. And then you start looking around for more upgrade material. You start looking around for better weapons, better armor, shields. You start looking around for potions that you can mix together, like the tiers that you can mix together in order to improve how your build feels, in order to improve the stats temporarily for your character. So if it's a particularly like FP heavy character, you start to focus on that area of it, and it's not as simple as like, yeah, we're just gonna go out and hope for the best. You know, we're gonna go out to a very specific area, hope that we can just brute force it, get the item we need, and then head back. Because the loot is randomized, it means that every cave you look at is enticing. Every camp you look at is enticing, because you might get the thing that you need. Alternatively, you might not, but more often than not, the loot is quite generous in this game, because you're spending 3 nights in this game, which is the equivalent of, I want to say it's like anywhere between 35 minutes to an hour. It depends on how long you take down the individual bosses, but that's a lot of time to spend with one character and one build with with their own specific weapon arts, and you sort of get the vibe I'm talking about here, right? This is an improvement. This is the improvement, but you sort of also get why I say that I don't think this was intentional. Because that idea of that circle closing, and there being a time limit on where you can go and what you can do, and everything being procedurally generated, the side effect of that is looking at the camps, looking at areas that, like, field bosses, and being like, okay, you're going to net me some runes, but also if I kill a boss, I will also get the opportunity to get a random drop. Cool. Bosses are now more enticing than Elden Ring, which is an insane thing for me to say. Like, I said at the start of this, I was not a fan of the bosses in Elden Ring. I think they're poorly designed. I think that the dragons aren't adjusted to the world they're in. I think that a lot of the field bosses are just plopped into this world, and they're just sort of left there. And it's like, okay, fine, whatever. You know, in order to get one of the most valuable items in the game, you need a swordstone key, and then you need to go right back to where you started in Elden Ring, and then you start fighting the oscillating tree spirit, and you're just staring at this thing going, why are you here? You're gigantic, you're just fur, and you're in, like, a cavern. Like, you're in, like, a boxed room. It's insane. It feels like luck to fight something like that. So to actually start looking at those bosses and being like, okay, you haven't fixed those issues. That being said, you sort of have fixed the motivation. like you have motivated me to go after these bosses now, because I'm not just looking at them going, ah, no, it's fine, I'll get my build and then I'll go to the end or something like that, because the bosses are copied and pasted about the place. This world is significantly smaller, and as a result, there are only so many bosses that can be placed about this world, and then as a result of that, at the end of each night, you're fighting a unique boss, a bit like the Fell Omen that I died to, and we will end up facing later on again in this video. It becomes this thing of like, okay, sure, I will deal with your bullshit, only because I've got 2 other people that can distract the boss for long enough for me to get a shit ton of damage on them. And then you realise that the weapon that you've got, the bosses scale as each night goes on. It becomes increasingly difficult. You sort of get into this river of like, okay, I need to use everything in my arsenal to take down that boss. It's not just a matter of me swinging my sword. I need to use everything. So you'll start to see me use, like you saw a bit earlier on, and like you'll see substantially more as we start this day now. My ultimate attack, the fire burst, things like that. You start setting these things up. And yeah, I think in all the areas I just described, it's an improvement overall. The issue is literally the assets from Elden Ring and Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. If there is a boss that was poorly designed with terrible telegraphing from those previous titles, they're largely unchanged in this title. Which means that a bad boss is still a bad boss. You're going to go up against like the Fell Omen. You're going to go up against like some their names have changed slightly, which is why I'm struggling to call them out. But you sort of get what I mean, right? Like, you've got a regular enemy here, the Abductor Virgin, which is just one of these guys. It's like, I don't know what to say about it. It's just there. They've slapped the boss bar on it. It feels as bad as a field boss. The only thing is, the health bar indicates that it will give you an item drop, which I guess improves even that from the base game of Elden Ring as well, because now I'm looking at this and thinking, well, one of my issues with fighting most bosses in Elden Ring is that it didn't feel rewarding. You weren't given a lot of runes for a lot of the field bosses, so what was the point, you know? You weren't given too many items when entering those areas, so what was the point? And now you play this and it's like, oh shit. All of the bosses give you items, and there will often be an item that will be specific to your character. Sometimes you get like a stat boost or something like that, or you'll get like a buff for the remainder of your time playing this. So even enemies just with health bars, it's like, okay, the enemy has like more health, and that's how they're classifying it as a boss, but it's still going to give me loot, which means I'm still going to go and do it. You know, I'm not just going to run past it. But yeah, to reiterate once again, the poorly designed enemies and poorly designed bosses are still poorly designed. You're not going to get over that, unfortunately. Elden Ring isn't a game that's filled with particularly compelling or complex bosses to fight. It's some of the simplest in the series, and unfortunately there are also a lot of crap ones. Once again, you take the dragons for example, there's a very minimal moveset that they have, and they will often be defeated by the arenas they are placed in. You get things like the Mad Pumpkin heads and stuff like that it just feel ridiculous to fight. Like, they're not particularly memorable because there is a severe lack in terms of like a moveset to contend with, which means it just devolves into being, as I said before, a hack and slash game, which is something that the Soulsborne series wasn't really. But it's not even a particularly good hack and slash game, because occasionally Elden Ring will demand of you to do something similar to that of the previous Souls games, just with a boss that's poorly designed. That's not me saying that all Elden Ring bosses are poorly designed, but the vast majority of them are, and unfortunately they are all, like, a lot of those bosses are picked from there and put to here. I should probably talk a little bit about what's happening now. because it's been like nearly 25 minutes and we've just swiftly moved on to a match. Meet my fellas, meet my boys, you know, my guys, my teammates for this. Something that I noted, like in Souls cooperative games, gameplay scenarios, you'll be quite entangled with the person that you're playing with more often than not because it takes a lot of effort to summon them. So if you're going to summon anyone, it will often be for a purpose, which means that you're going to stick with them. And I, oddly enough, found this to be slightly more compelling than the usual Soulsborne co-op fiasco. All three of us were sticking together throughout the entire course of this adventure. We didn't break apart too often. Maybe one of us would get lost or something like that, but more often than not we would stick together because we knew that the best chance of getting through this entire thing was by sticking together. The bosses break easily when you've got another being there to fight them, so it just made sense to be like, okay, shit, yeah, let's group up, let's maintain what we're doing here. And that stuck through to the bitter end. And that's the case for every match that I've played so far, which was just surprising to me. You know, you always get that worry that grief's going to happen, but then you realise, you know, each match is anywhere between 35 minutes to an hour long. And that's quite a bit of time to put into something like this. So to grief is really goddamn time consuming if anyone was going to do that, so it just made sense to be like, no, screw it, we are a unit, there's absolutely no reason to waste that time together. And as you can see, like, the runes and things are often shared between players, which means that you all benefit from working together. If you work together, you take down enemies significantly easier, which means overall, you know, you're benefiting everyone. Every action has some sort of positive gain on someone else within a match, which is just nice, you know. It's nice to be like, oh shit, that guy's taking on a boss. I should probably help. I might be out of my depth. I might not know this boss's moveset too well if you're unfamiliar with certain enemy types, because you're playing with a predetermined build, which means you can't just brute force a lot of these things, and you're dealing with some really shoddy telegraphing at times. So it meant, okay, yeah, it's in our best interest to work together here, because we will all benefit from this. We can talk a little bit about the circle closing in now. Because the circle closes in, I found myself paying significantly more attention to the environment I was a part of. You don't have torrent to make a quick getaway. You have a standard sprint, and then you've got a slightly quicker sprint, and then you can do what I'm about to do here. This was just purely for experimentation. I was going to drop immediately, so you can sort of glide and get a larger view of things as you're going. These little camps are decent enough as well, the idea being that in order to get that pickup you have to kill all the enemies within the camp. So it incentivizes you to even do that. You know, normal little enemies, that I'm thinking of like the Atlas Plateau, when you enter there and you've got that camp right in front of the area, and you just like bypass it, you know, you brute force through it and you go all the way on up to the Ashen Capital. It felt like, holy shit, you know, I want to fight this camp. I want to help my friends out and fight this camp, because we will all gain loot from it. We won't just all gain loot from it, we'll also gain runes from it. There's no downside. I'm down there, and as you can see that in order to be revived, someone needs to attack you, or you need to attack them a number of times. And each time when you go down, that bar, you can see there's like 3 mini bars in total. Another won't be added each time that happens until it gets to the frame, then it just maxes out there. So, you know, you can't just not live, I guess. You know, you can't just give up and just be like, they've got this. You still have to interact, otherwise there will eventually be a game over, but it does take a bit of time to deal with that. But yeah, the idea of like attacking to revive someone is it's a weird one. It's not one that I would have expected, but all in all, I think that it works because you're keeping up the momentum. You know, you're sacrificing stamina, which means there is a cost to it, but at the same time, you're still having to be wary of your environment. But it means that it's not as simple as just like holding down a button and waiting for them to revive. And oh no, something's going to attack me. What do I do? It's a matter of like, you can revive them in chunks. You still have to get them within a certain amount of time, but you can prioritize how and when that happens, which is pretty cool. Big fan of that. The builds we got here are it's nothing too interesting. You've basically got two varying melee users and a ranged one, and the idea being that our ranged user was there for support for a lot of things because they could fire arrows in order to revive one of us when we went down. It meant that we were dealing like the brunt of the damage of wherever we were going. And they were there to dish out damage, and if one of us goes down, to take to recover us safely from a distance. They're also there to lure enemies over there whilst we, you know, we took care of them in the meantime. But yeah, got these little merchants that are about the place. I kept looking at them whenever I went over to see if I could find anything decent. And not in this game, but later on, I started using the tier flasks and stuff like that. You know, for the wondrous mix. So there are some things worth getting there, but more often than not, I found myself just switching to a better weapon later on. When you level up or when you fight certain bosses, your weapon will also level up with you. So I do switch my weapon twice, I think, in this run. But for the most part, you'll see me just getting used to it because it's my first time using these weapons. Trying to figure out how I think works. Yeah, I'm really trying to get to grips with my little whip there, my little hook shot. But yeah, look at the amount of runes we got. It's pretty cool the way all this works. Full damage seems to be largely negated. I wasn't expecting that, but fair enough. Mobility, if you will, is it's not something that I would say is drastically improved in this game. I've already mentioned the double sprint that you got, which I think I'm about to use here because... Oh no, I'm going to use on our way out of here because the worst case scenario happened within this cave, as you're about to see moments later. But that little double sprint did come in handy because it's not as fast as Torrent, but it's fast enough to get it to do a big flee should I need to. Speaking of which, any second now there is going to be a big old reason for that. You can see the health bar goes down ever so slightly when that happens. Yeah, this was a... In fact, yeah, there we go. You're going to see me do a little wall jump here as well. The wall jumps and vaults, pretty darn cool as well. That solves a lot of the issues I had with the terrain in Elden Ring initially anyway. Torrent was a miserable bugger to control in Elden Ring, which meant doing the more meticulous jumps here and there was just frustrating. Doing that by myself now was like, okay, cool, awesome. No issues here. I am fine with that. I guess one issue that I would say is that there'll be times when a quick panic and I'm trying to figure out what to do. It's not always clear how steep something is, but that happens few and far between. More often than not, you can wall jump up most things. We're about to encounter our first major boss of this run. Of this, this is the boss of the first night that I've encountered. You saw that you select a Night Lord at the start of the run, and the idea being that you're fighting your way to take on the Night Lord. And if you don't, then you get some little buffs, some little trinkets here and there to help you in your next run, so on and so forth. And matchmaking is a thing, so it means that you're normally quite scaled with the players that you're with. It means that the game sort of scales with you as well, so you're never like overly down the shitter when it comes to stuff like that. But I did feel like everything was quite even in terms of difficulty, anyway. But yeah, here we go. Elden Ring boss, Elden Ring dungeon boss even. That was just the first boss of this run, and I wasn't really too impressed with this. That ultimate freaked me out because I generally thought that was just like some weird enemy that got through the knight that creeped in. But the demi-humans aren't something I was particularly fond of in the base game of Elden Ring. And here, not so much either, turns out. But yeah, you can sort of see my tactic here. Get a few hits in, dodge out, wait until my stamina recovers, and then whip back in if needs to be, or grapple back in. The weapon I had didn't do a lot of damage, but that's why there are 3 of us doing this at once. So there we go, got that. Music's got a little bit more personality than the base game of Elden Ring, but I wouldn't say it's better. It felt like sort of a weird cover version of the Elden Ring tracks. Oh, here we go. The dormant powers that I was referring to before, the little buffs that you can get. Yeah, improved dodging. Why wouldn't I don't take this as a review. I should have probably said that at the start. Don't take this as a review. Largely just because, as I am talking about this right now, I haven't done everything in this game. You know, take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt. This isn't me telling you, like, oh, you know, if you like it, then you like it, that's fine. Because there's some... The curse of Elden Ring persists with this title. And that's always going to be the case, unfortunately. If this had, like... It's the same for Elden Ring. Like, if the bosses were well telegraphed, in many cases, and they weren't just sludge fests, if the world wasn't just a series of like, ah, yeah, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want, isn't that cool? Like, no, because now you've essentially, by telling me I can go anywhere and do whatever I want, all I have to do is say, I want to do this build, and now I've eliminated like 90% of the world that's, you know, it's no longer of interest to me now. This sort of, you know, smaller world, everything's closing in, so you're taking in what you can, when you can, you know, as you're just sprinting about the place. So, I guess this world is more enticing than the base game of Elden Ring as well. I know these sound like really, like, sweeping statements, like, holy shit, he's saying this game's better than Elden Ring. It's like, I think you guys, sort of, you overestimate how, maybe underestimate, maybe that's the term, you underestimate how much, like, of a low bar that is. Like, being better than Dark Souls 2, being better than Elden Ring, it's not a massive achievement, because they've done it. We have clear examples, and I don't think Dark Souls 1 is particularly complicated in terms of a title to describe, like, why it's as good as it is, why it stands the test of time today. The bosses are, you know, for Souls bosses, they are quite simple, but it's the telegraphing that makes it. You're often working with the arena in order to take down a boss. You think of like the first few bosses in Dark Souls, you are limited by the arena in certain circumstances. You're limited by what you have at that moment in time, which means that you have to sort of work within the boundaries of what you get at the start of that game. It is a more linear experience as a result, but you sort of get what I mean. Like, the idea of being locked into something like that means that you have to pay significantly more attention to the way the bosses work. In Elden Ring, you can pretty much brute force most of the bosses. Like the Erdtree Avatar here, this is a difficult fight at the moment. I think the Erdtree Avatar is okay as a fight. A lot of its moves are decently telegraphed, which makes it a better fight in this game automatically, because I am stuck with the equipment that this run has given me, which means I have to get used to this equipment. It means I can't just brute force it. I can't level up my weapons to be insanely damaging. You know, you can't just like apply holy to absolutely everything and just one-shot every enemy in this game. You have to work with the equipment you have. That automatically puts it above Elden Ring in that regard. But yeah, as I was saying, like the bosses in Dark Souls 1, they're not complicated, you know, in terms of like their design. It's normally about how to deal damage to them. It's normally about you know, you're learning the timing of what you're dealing with within that first Dark Souls game, and you are rewarded as a result if you get the timing down right. Whereas From Software's recent sort of outings have been more along the lines of, if you know what an enemy is going to do, that doesn't mean that you're out of the woods, because the enemy can feign their attack now. They can add an extra 2 hits to a combo. They might not even do a combo. They might completely freak you out and then decide to damage you because you thought that you might be able to get away with a heal as a result, or you might dodge in a particular way, and they are programmed to take advantage of that. Basically, Elden Ring, what I'm trying to say, exists in 2 formats, and that's either for you to bully Elden Ring or for Elden Ring to bully you. There is no in between. There's no point in Elden Ring where I feel like, okay, I can properly grapple what I'm doing here. Everything seems fine. I understand the I understand this world, and I feel like that I'm progressing forward. I feel like there's a form of progression from beginning to end. There isn't. Bosses in the end game of Elden Ring do not feel like a natural progression of the bosses at the start of Elden Ring. It just feels like more of the same like philosophy, which is random garbo light show with you spamming attacks and praying that one of your dodges will actually get through the janky hitboxes half the time. Here, on the other hand, it feels like, okay, those bosses are pretty much the same, but you got 2 other guys to help you out a lot of the time, which makes those bosses automatically more bearable. I'm pretty sure you're about to see one of my first, like... Yeah, you're about to see one of my first deaths here. Not because of the grafted scion in the corner. More to do with the fact that I wasn't paying attention to the ring closing, and I think all 3 of us started to have a little panic about how to navigate away from what was happening. There was a giant cliff in front of us, and it didn't quite feel... Here we go. Yeah, all 3 of us were like, okay, yeah, let's do this. Let's take on a boss. Why not? Like, we're getting some decent loot for this. What's the worst that can happen? What's the absolute worst that can happen? Oh, shit. Yeah, it was at this point we all just decided, you know what? Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's not worth it. I could already see like a route forward from here. Oh, I wouldn't have made it, to be fair. That's fine. I can talk a little bit about optimization and frame rate and all that stuff, because obviously the game will only run as smooth as your internet connection, which is why this dips all over the place. Sometimes it'll be running at 60, sometimes it will be running at 30, sometimes it'll be annoyingly running anywhere in between. So it's just sort of, I'm dealing with what I've got. Quite unfortunately, the editing software that I'm using should hopefully smooth it out, and I know that OBS does wonders for that at times as well. So fingers crossed there. I was pretty sure that this is where the death happens. Oh, that's sort of what I meant by, like, it was kind of hard to tell where, like, certain cliff faces were, like, too much at times. Maybe it's in the third night where, the third day where we all just sort of crumble. I should have probably said as well, this is an unsuccessful run, but that's just because many runs will be unsuccessful. You're sort of building up, learning about those final Night Lord bosses, and I'll say it off the bat as well. I am a little bit mixed on that. As a result, whatever muscle memory you might have, like, if the one thing that Elden Ring relied on is that if the bosses were poorly designed, at least muscle memory might be able to carry you through some of the madness. Unfortunately, that's not the case here, because it will take you anywhere between 35 minutes to an hour to reach said boss again, which means that any muscle memory you might have had from taking on that boss for the first time around, it's going to take a while to reach that point again. And yes, unfortunately, the Night Lord that we face isn't great as a boss. I couldn't really tell what it was doing most of the time. I got like a small, like, I could tell what attacks it was doing. I could not see the wind up for the life of me. Not to say that it just instantly goes into it, but when you have an attack, when you have an enemy that attacks in sort of like a discus way, so it's like 3 wolves essentially. They often spin, they snap, and they breathe fire. It felt like the wind up for a lot of those attacks were like pretty identical, and because you're dealing with 3 players taking on 1 boss, I can take down Elden Ring bosses fine with the madness that is multiple AI or multiple like players dishing out on the boss together, because I've fought those bosses before, I fought these enemies before, I know what I'm doing with these guys. You know, it's not a hard experience to look at something that I've spent like hundreds of hours on and being like, okay, I know how to get through this, that's fine. This is just more of that, with 2 other people distracting the boss. If anything, it's slightly easier. I'm just having to contend with the equipment that I've got half the time, which sort of balances it out. But when you get to a new boss, a boss that you haven't fought before, or a boss that you haven't fought within the DS3 onwards gameplay style, you sort of get caught off, like, brute forcing. You would probably say, oh, you have to pay attention to the bosses then. It's like, you can't, because you've got 2 other people that are wailing away on the boss. What, are you going to tell those 2 people to stand back and do nothing? No. They're going to try and attack the boss together, which means that all 3 of you are going to be staring at the Night Lord going, okay, I don't know who's aggroed on at any given second. I don't know when the attack's coming. I don't know what the attack will be. And then, on top of that, I don't have the window of time to step back and look at what it's doing. If I do that, then I'm putting the other 2 people I'm playing with at risk. Which is it's pretty much what happened in this run. Not to say that we stood back, but it was more a case of like everyone was really trying to get into a groove of like what attack to do when. We were trying to combo and sort of stun lock the boss in some reasonable way. because it just reached a point where its attack patterns were manic, and our reward for that was just being downed over and over and over again until eventually we just, like, no one could revive anyone else. It was just sealed shut, pretty much. This is the point where I die because of the night coming in. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing at this point. I just decided to follow the person in front of me, which led to miserable results. I don't think I entirely, like, I had a look at the dude that just ran up there, and my brain was like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll just jump up this. That'll be fine. Health starts dropping, health starts dropping, health, where do I go from here? Where do I go from here? Where do I go from here? I'm gonna die, this is it for me. Holy shit. And then because you're in the night, you're in the rain section of the arena. That little revive meter drops a little bit faster, so that was quite unfortunate. Fortunately, the one thing you lose is a level, but you do not lose those runes, and it is pretty easy to get them back. Not that it matters overly much, because as long as you get used to the weapons that you're using, levels are... Yeah, you're essentially just costing your teammates a little bit of time per fight, because it's going to take you a bit longer to dish out more damage and whatnot, which in turn gives them incentive to revive you. But you might also read the difficulty of what I'm saying in regards to that as well, because you're going to see a lot of people that will praise this game on the basis of, like, oh yeah, no, Elden Ring Nightreign is really cool because of how much fun it is to play with friends, how much fun it is to play with people online. It's to those people I would kindly ask to take a few steps back and realise that the enjoyment that they're actually getting out of this title isn't the game itself, but rather the experience you're having with the people you're playing with, if that makes sense. I had a lot of fun with these two strangers here. I had a lot of fun with substantially more people I was playing with. This is one of, like, the most snug player bases I have been involved with in a while, and I can say that my time with them pretty darn good. No regrets in that regard, but I was having more fun with the human interaction than I was with the game itself. The idea of, like, us, like, comboing our attacks together. That's something else that you would have noticed at this point as well. When an enemy is stunned or when they're down on the ground, instead of having invincible frames like they would do in Elden Ring, you can now just continue to dish out damage, which is a godsend, because it means the game isn't lying to you. They're not behaving in an ungodly way, so that's pretty fun. Here's the Fell Omen. Oh my goodness, it's back. I didn't know how to feel about that. I kind of feel like that this is an overused... Like, I've seen the Fell Omen used in so many people's playthroughs and so much marketing material, and I fought this guy so many times in Nightreign as well, and it just left me thinking to myself, I don't really know how I feel about that being, like, an over-reliant boss, and it's not like a high percentage for it spawning. Maybe there's an even percentage for each of the bosses spawning, but having a basically Mog appear over and over and over again got to me. I say that, I do get a satisfying kill on this boss, I have to say. One that I did not think would be possible. It's just kind of cool just to see, like, the other players take responsibility for everything that's happening, you know. If they see a down player, it's not like, oh no, it's not like in other Soulsborne cooperative experiences where I had, where it's like, oh, there's a weaker person here. Okay, we're just going to leave them to one side whilst we dish out all the damage or something like that. These guys were fairly on top of reviving each other and me and myself in return. because it meant that you had one more person to dish out damage or to distract the AI overall. I mean, pretty much what I'm saying at the end of the day is that a lot of my praise for this comes down to the fact that the AI is still Elden Ring AI, which isn't great. It can't handle anything but one-on-one fights, so the second you introduce something else within that arena, if you will, they start to freak out. So these little fights here rely quite a bit on you just exploiting that. We've got less than 10 minutes of this video, which will probably tell you how good little fight against the Night Lord went. You'll get to see a decent chunk of what will happen within that fight. But long story short, it did not go particularly well. But you'll get a taste for it. You'll get a taste for what a fight like that looks like during a run. Because once again, you won't necessarily be successful each and every single time. And you still get something out of it. You won't see much of that either. I might record like a few runs at some point in the future with some live commentary, but I figured that it was just better doing some post commentary for this, just to get that out of the way, give you my first impressions. But if you wanted a recommendation, I don't think I can actually give it. I know you might be thinking, oh wow, but you were so positive about this. I want to repeat what I said earlier about that being a low bar. About things that I had said being a low bar anyway. The idea, there we go, and that was satisfying for me. But yeah, the idea of these still being Elden Ring bosses, a lot of them with the Elden Ring mentality, meant that they weren't well designed, unfortunately. And a lot of the things that improve the game, I don't think are purposeful. I don't think that they're intentional, is what I'm trying to say. It all stacks. It's still not great as a title. I wouldn't call Elden Ring a good game. I think that Shadow of the Erd Tree is, quite frankly, a terrible experience. And going into this title, my brain was like, okay, I'm looking for average. I'm looking for something that's passable. And I can say that this doesn't reach that bar still, unfortunately. And it is just because the enemies that you're fighting aren't well designed. As we are about to witness. But I can say that on a subjective level, once again, for that human element, I enjoyed my time with this game. I think that, because supposedly they're going to be updating this and adding DLC as they go, I think that this is probably a scenario where it's worth waiting. See if they start to add new original bosses. And if they do add new and original bosses, or if they add more Dark Souls bosses, from the decent variety, some more Dark Souls 3 bosses, some more Dark Souls 1 bosses, mayhaps, something along those lines, even some Demon Souls bosses, then maybe at that point I'd be like, you know what? They have taken some decent elements out of those games and put it in here. They did it the laziest way possible. They literally just lifted them and plopped them down. But if you wanted to go up against those bosses with Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring combat, here you go. I don't think it's a bad idea to do that. I think you might feel a little overstimulated. The few times when I have encountered Souls bosses, I have essentially gone cross-eyed. They haven't lasted too long, but my time with them has just been like, oh shit, yeah, I'm playing with Dark Souls 3 combat. Fucking whale, you know? But it's a complicated one. Honestly, I think that you'll probably be better off just going back to those games. They've got like the Nameless King in this game, and it's like, oh, isn't it cool that they got the Nameless King and put it into this game? No, because that doesn't feel too special, you know? This is still using Dark Souls 3 combat for a lot of things. It's still using that engine. It's still using the enhancements that Dark Souls 3 made to Dark Souls 1's combat. And let's be honest, the combat in Dark Souls isn't great anyway. But putting that forward, what you're essentially just doing is asking them to play Dark Souls 3 again with summons for a bit, you know, with cooperative plays for a bit, and it makes me roll my eyes slightly because my brain's just like, okay, if I wanted to fight the Nameless King, it kind of makes me want to go back and play Dark Souls 3 all over again, because then at least, you know, as much as I don't like the world, like the level design of Dark Souls 3, I don't necessarily think that the individual levels are bad. I just think that they feel very cramped in comparison to what they could be. I'm not saying like open world levels of stuff, but I'm referring to like it's very simplistic. It feels like you're walking down the street and then there's a boss at the end. Whereas in Dark Souls, it sort of felt like that you were walking down a living street, where there were the paths that branched off into specific areas, and they all met their natural ends, and they would all snake back around. It felt like you were exploring an actual city in Dark Souls, whereas in Dark Souls 3, it felt like you were exploring levels. That being said, my time with Dark Souls 3 was still good, and I would much rather go through the entire experience of replaying Dark Souls 3 to get to the bosses in Dark Souls 3 that I would want to play, rather than hoping for a randomizer in Nightreign. But that's the other thing as well, because this isn't exactly, it's not adhering to Elden Ring logic in the sense that you're gaining levels for your base character and stuff like that. You're working with individual characters with unique character abilities and classes, which sort of means that each time you approach that boss, you do have to approach them with the character that you're playing as and with the weapons that they have, which adds a level of challenge that isn't in Elden Ring, which means that those bosses that you initially glazed over, there is more to them because of this, but you're still fighting those bosses. Which is why I say it's an improvement on Elden Ring, but in terms of like how much, it's a step in the right direction. But we were underwater, we were submerged with Elden Ring. With Shadow of the Erdtree, we were fucking dead. Like it was close to the point where I would have said that like the pressure of coming up from Shadow of the Erdtree would have killed this. You know, if they were like, oh no guys, come on, this is going to be really good, we promise. And then they just delivered more, like, complete garbage, I would have thrown off the series for good. I know this isn't exactly From Software entirely. It's not necessarily the main team working on this title. But I think that for what this team have done, I would much prefer to see what this team has going forwards, rather than the main From Software team, because I've sort of lost faith in that moment. I'll see what happens with like Dusk Blooders and stuff like that, but I should imagine that I will keep you guys up to date with my experience in this game. I'm going to probably do a video talking about the individual bosses at some point, and maybe even get an old chum back, do a little podcast talking about our experiences with this title if he has picked it up at this point, because I think that it would be a pretty cool idea to talk about this game in substantially more detail. This has been an hour, and I haven't gone into nearly as much detail as I would like to, but there is a lot to talk about here. If you do want to pick this game up, I would probably say, I know it's like £35-ish, going on 40. I would probably still say wait for it to go on sale at the very least, or just play Dark Souls 3 again, or better yet, play Dark Souls 1 again. You know, treat yourself, have a good time. I'm not saying this is a bad time, but you are really depending on that human player element, and I think I've just gotten lucky. Just, you know, sit it out for the time being. Maybe wait for more content. You know, maybe wait for more content from my channel. Maybe wait for more updates for the game, stuff along those lines. But yeah,